Picture this. A French Navy helicopter descends from the sky over the Mediterranean Sea. Soldiers rappel onto the deck of an oil tanker. The ship is named the Grinch, and what it is carrying, 750,000 barrels of Russian crude oil, is the lifeblood of Putin's war machine. That operation, carried out on January 22nd, sent shockwaves through the Kremlin. But here is the thing. The seizure of that tanker is only the beginning of the story, because in the same week, something even more significant happened. Something that could fundamentally reshape the entire intelligence landscape of the Ukraine war. France didn't just intercept a ship. France replaced the United States as Ukraine's single most important military intelligence partner. And that, my friends, changes everything. Stay with us, because today we are unpacking both of these developments in full. We are going to explain why Vladimir Putin has two very serious new headaches, why France has emerged as the most consequential European power in this conflict, and why, despite everything, Ukraine's position may be stronger today than it has been in months. If you are new here at World Brief Daily, this is exactly the kind of deep dive analysis you can expect from this channel every single time. Make sure you hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a video. Now, let's get into it. Vladimir Putin has many problems. His war in Ukraine has stretched on far longer than he ever anticipated. Almost the entire Western world has turned against him. His economy, despite the propaganda, is bleeding. But nobody expected France, of all nations, to become one of his most formidable adversaries without firing a single bullet, without deploying troops, without launching missiles. France has hit Russia where it hurts most, in the wallet and in the dark. Let's start with the ship. On January 22nd, 2026, according to reporting by BBC News and confirmed by France's own military, the French Navy launched a bold operation in the Alboran Sea, that stretch of the Western Mediterranean that sits between the southern coast of Spain and the northern coast of Morocco. The target was a tanker called the Grinch, a vessel sailing under a Comoros flag, loaded with Russian crude that had departed from Russia's Arctic port of Murmansk in early January. The Grinch isn't just any ship. As reported by the Maritime Executive, this vessel was built in 2004, registered through a shell corporation in the Marshall Islands, had not undergone a single inspection since December 2023, and had its class certification withdrawn, overdue for renewal since October 2025. It was sanctioned by the United States in January 2025 for violating the G7 oil price cap, then sanctioned by the European Union in February and by the United Kingdom in July. Canada and Switzerland added it to their own lists as well. This ship had no business being on the open ocean. And yet there it was, quietly ferrying Russian oil worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The operation to stop it involved both a French naval vessel and two military helicopters. As reported by Al Jazeera, footage released by the French military showed soldiers descending directly onto the deck from one of those helicopters. Once aboard, French naval personnel examined the ship's documents, and as the French maritime authorities confirmed, those documents validated every suspicion. The Comoros flag was false. The vessel was stateless, in violation of international maritime law. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, took to X that same morning to announce what had happened. "We will not tolerate any violation," Macron declared. This morning, the French Navy boarded an oil tanker coming from Russia, subject to international sanctions and suspected of flying a false flag. The operation was conducted on the high seas in the Mediterranean, with the support of several of our allies. It was carried out in strict compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. A judicial investigation has been opened. The vessel has been diverted. That mention of allies was significant, because France did not act alone. According to reporting from Navy Lookout and LBC, the United Kingdom played a critical supporting role. The Royal Navy's Gibraltar Squadron patrol boat, HMS Dagger, tracked the Grinch as it sailed eastward through the Strait of Gibraltar, that narrow, strategically vital waterway between Spain and northern Africa that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. The UK Defence Secretary John Healey confirmed that Britain provided tracking support to French authorities as the ship moved through the strait and into the Alboran Sea, where the French Navy was waiting. This was not the first time in recent weeks that the UK had taken such a supporting role. Earlier in January, as reported by Sky News, British forces assisted the United States in the interception of a sanctioned tanker in the North Atlantic. In that operation, the UK offered access to several of its bases, made the RFA Tide Force available for refueling American pursuers, and provided at least one Royal Air Force aircraft for aerial surveillance. The tanker in question, previously called the Bella 1, then renamed the Marinera, had led American forces on a chase covering hundreds of miles before finally being intercepted between Scotland and Iceland, sailing under the flag of Guyana. The message across all of these operations is clear. The noose is tightening. The Grinch was diverted to the port of Marseille-Fos in southern France. According to Safety for Sea, the ship's captain, a 58-year-old Indian national, was detained and handed to judicial authorities. The remaining crew members, also Indian nationals, were kept on board under supervision. A full criminal investigation was opened, and then something remarkable happened. The story didn't end there. As reported by Euronews, after nearly 4 weeks in French custody, the owners of the Grinch paid a penalty of several million euros and admitted guilt for operating without a valid flag of registry. On February 17th, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot announced the vessel's release. Bypassing European sanctions comes at a price, Barrot wrote on X. Russia will no longer be able to fund its war with impunity via a ghost fleet off our coasts. That statement is a warning as much as it is a victory lap. Now let's put the seizure of the Grinch into its proper context, because in isolation, one ship is not a catastrophic blow to Putin's shadow fleet, but the broader picture is far more alarming for Moscow. According to Lloyd's List intelligence data cited by The Guardian, Russia's shadow fleet consists of approximately 1,423 tankers. Of those, 921 are sanctioned by at least one of the three major sanctioning blocs: the United States, the European Union, or the United Kingdom. These are aging, often decrepit vessels, many sailing in states of disrepair that would render them illegal to operate under normal maritime standards. They are owned through complex webs of shell companies in non-sanctioning countries, registered under the flags of obscure nations, and used for a single purpose: keeping Russian oil money flowing. According to Ukrainian shipping magazine, Putin has spent an estimated $14 billion assembling this fleet as of May 2025. That is how much this operation matters to him. Oil is not just a commodity for Russia, it is the fuel that powers his war. Without those revenue streams, Russia cannot sustain the level of military spending that the conflict in Ukraine demands. But here is where it gets interesting. As reported by Naval News, the United States alone had seized 7 Shadow Fleet tankers between December 10th, 2025 and late January 2026. 5 of those had direct ties to Russia. Ukraine itself has launched multiple strikes on Russian tankers in the Black Sea, 7 attacks since November 2025 alone, with 3 tankers hit in the 2 weeks surrounding the Grinch seizure. As Ukrainian authorities have made clear, these are not random acts. They are part of a deliberate strategy to strangle Russia's energy export infrastructure, and France is now part of that effort in a serious way. This was not the first French operation against a Shadow Fleet tanker. Last September 2025, as reported by The Times, French naval forces boarded another oil tanker off France's Atlantic coast, a vessel known at various points as the Pushpa or the Barakai, which had sailed from Russia's Primorsk oil terminal near St. Petersburg while flying the flag of Benin. Putin himself denounced that earlier interception as an act of piracy. That same week, in response to the growing threat of European interdiction, Russia dispatched a Project 2380 corvette, the Boyki, into the English Channel to escort one of its tankers back to the Baltic Sea. It was the first such military escort since Britain threatened to begin seizing Shadow Fleet vessels. Russia is scared. The fleet it spent billions building is now operating under threat. The legal framework for further seizures is firmly in place. As the European Policy Center has pointed out, European nations possess robust legal grounds for these operations. Under Article 110 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, warships have the right to board any vessel on the high seas if there are reasonable grounds to suspect it is stateless. MARPOL and SOLAS conventions additionally allow ships to be detained if they fail to meet basic safety standards. And as Putin is painfully aware, Russia cannot publicly fight these seizures without acknowledging that these ships are, in fact, Russian, which would destroy the entire fiction of plausible deniability that the Shadow Fleet was designed to maintain. Vladimir Zelensky, speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January, captured the frustration and the opportunity perfectly. As reported by multiple outlets, Zelensky asked aloud why Russian oil was still being transported along European coastlines, funding a war against a European nation when the legal tools to stop it exist. The answer increasingly is, it shouldn't be. And France is proving that point with action, not words. Before we go deeper into the second and arguably more important development, we want to ask, If you are finding this analysis useful, hit subscribe on World Brief Daily and tap the notification bell. This channel exists to give you the clearest, most detailed picture of what's really happening in this conflict. You deserve that level of depth. Now, back to France. Because the seizure of the Grinch, as consequential as it is not the most important thing France did in the last 2 weeks of January 2026. On January 15th, 2026, 1 week before French commandos rappelled onto the deck of a Russian oil tanker in the Mediterranean, Emmanuel Macron stood before the French military at the Istres-le-Toubé Air Force Base in southern France and delivered a statement that immediately reverberated across every intelligence capital in the world. Where Ukraine was overwhelmingly dependent on American intelligence capabilities a year ago, Macron said, today, 2/3 of those capabilities are provided by France. 2/3. Read that again. 2/3 of the military intelligence Ukraine currently uses in its war against Russia now comes from France. As reported by Business Insider and confirmed by multiple outlets, including the Kyiv Independent and Reuters, this revelation represents one of the most dramatic quiet shifts of the entire conflict, and it has enormous implications for Ukraine, for Russia, for NATO, and for the broader geopolitical contest that this war has become. Let's break down what it means, starting with the context. From the very beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, Ukraine was extraordinarily dependent on the United States for military intelligence. American satellite imagery told Ukrainian commanders where Russian armored columns were massing. American signals intelligence helped Ukraine intercept Russian communications. American early warning systems provided crucial alerts when Russian bombers took flight, when ballistic missiles were launched, and when cruise missile salvos were incoming. Ukraine didn't just use this intelligence to defend itself, it used it to strike. American data was cited by U.S. officials themselves as enabling some of Ukraine's most precise and devastating long-range strikes into Russian territory, including, according to reporting by the Financial Times in October 2025, deep strikes on Russian oil facilities that disrupted fuel supplies to the front. That dependence was not just a military reality, it was a political one, and the Trump administration weaponized it. On March 5th, 2025, as confirmed by U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Washington suspended its sharing of military intelligence with Ukraine. The trigger was the now infamous White House meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, a confrontation that shocked the world and shook the foundations of Western unity. Intelligence was restored shortly after, but the message had been sent. American support was conditional. As reported by the Kyiv Independent, Trump later threatened to cut intelligence sharing again if Zelensky rejected a proposed peace plan that would have required Ukraine to cede significant territory to Russia, territory that includes regions Ukraine has never legally surrendered. The plan was, in the words of many analysts, openly capitulatory. Ukraine refused. It is in that context that Macron's announcement must be understood. What France has done, quietly, methodically, over the course of roughly a year, is build itself into Ukraine's most critical intelligence partner. And it has done so at precisely the moment when the reliability of American support has become deeply uncertain. But how? The answer lies in an extraordinary collection of French military satellites, systems that most people outside the defense world have never heard of, but which are now playing a decisive role in the outcome of a European war. The centerpiece of France's satellite intelligence architecture is the Composante Spatiale Optique, or CSO, a military reconnaissance constellation that reached full deployment in 2025 with the launch of its third and final satellite. As Militarny has reported, the system is built around 3 satellites, each with a defined role that allows them to operate in tandem. The first, CSO-1, flies at an altitude of 800 kilometers, roughly 497 miles. It is the high-altitude overview satellite, sweeping broad swaths of terrain and photographs captured at a resolution of up to 35 centimeters per pixel. That means each pixel represents roughly 13.7 inches of real-world surface. That is more than enough to identify the positions of Russian armored columns, artillery batteries, and aircraft on the ground. The second, CSO-2, flies lower at 480 kilometers, or about 298 miles. At that altitude, its optical system achieves a resolution of 18 centimeters per pixel, which is approximately 7 inches. The difference between CSO-1 and CSO-2 is not just sharpness. It is the ability to move from identifying a tank to identifying the specific model of that tank. More critically, CSO-2 is capable of distinguishing real military hardware from decoys, a capability of staggering importance in a conflict where Russia routinely deploys dummy vehicles and fake installations to waste Ukrainian ammunition. Then there is CSO-3, which operates at roughly the same altitude as CSO-1, but serves a completely different strategic purpose. It exists to increase the revisit rate, the frequency at which any given location can be photographed. With CSO-1 and CSO-3 in different orbital phases but at the same altitude, a target area can be re-imaged within approximately 12 hours of the previous pass. In a fast-moving conflict where Russian positions shift constantly, that freshness of data is not a luxury. It is a necessity. The technical sophistication of these systems runs deep. As Militarny explains, all three satellites share an identical design architecture, with optical systems built around the Korsh telescope configuration. The mirrors are made from Zeradur glass ceramic, an ultra-stable material with an almost zero thermal expansion coefficient, meaning the optical performance remains consistent regardless of the temperature swings that satellites routinely experience in orbit. All three satellites are also equipped with infrared imaging channels, enabling collection in low light and nighttime conditions. Each satellite carries multiple telescopes capable of imaging the same target from different angles simultaneously, a capability that makes 3D terrain modeling possible. For Ukraine's military planners, that 3D modeling capability alone is transformative. It means French intelligence doesn't just tell you that a Russian surface-to-air missile system is located at a particular set of coordinates. It gives you a three-dimensional picture of the terrain around it, including the angles of approach, the elevation changes, and the sight lines that matter when you are planning a precision drone or missile strike. And then there is the broader French intelligence ecosystem, because the CSO constellation is not operating alone. Ukraine may also be receiving imagery from the Pleiades and Pleiades NEO commercial satellites operated by Airbus Defence and Space. All four satellites in this constellation, 2 Pleiades and 2 NEO variants, were launched between 2011 and 2021. The 2 NEO satellites offer resolutions of 30 centimeters per pixel over swaths of 14 kilometers, while the older Pleiades 1A and 1B capture up to 20 kilometers of territory at 50 centimeter resolution. Notably, Ukrainian-built RD-843 rocket engines, manufactured in Dnipro, were used in the Vega rockets that launched Pleiades NEO 3 and 4 into orbit. Ukraine's contribution to those launches is a strong indicator that intelligence cooperation was being built quietly, long before it became public knowledge. Finally, there is the Cirrus constellation, 3 signals intelligence satellites that fly in a triangular formation at an altitude of approximately 700 kilometers. These are not optical imaging satellites. They are electronic intelligence gatherers designed to locate and triangulate the sources of radio emissions on the surface below. For Ukraine, this means that whenever Russian forces broadcast on radio frequencies, coordinating artillery strikes, transmitting orders, or operating radar systems, French satellites may be listening and may be able to pinpoint exactly where those signals are coming from. The full weight of this capability, assembled over years and now deployed for real-world combat intelligence, is formidable. But it is not without limitations, and in the interest of honest analysis, those gaps matter. As has been noted across multiple reports, France does not currently operate radar imaging satellites. Radar imaging, unlike optical imaging, functions regardless of cloud cover, and cloud cover over Ukraine during the autumn and winter months is significant. In those conditions, optical satellites become less useful. France partially addresses this gap by reportedly receiving radar satellite imagery from Germany and Italy, but whether that imagery flows directly to Ukraine or passes through France first remains unclear. More significantly, France's constellation currently lacks a robust ballistic missile early warning capability. When Russia fires an Iskander or an Oreshnik, Ukraine needs to know within seconds, not minutes, not hours. That kind of real-time infrared detection-based early warning currently depends on American systems. As Kirilo Budanov, the former head of Ukraine's military intelligence, now serving as chief of staff to President Zelensky, stated in December 2025, Ukraine remains critically dependent on Washington for early warning of ballistic threats. This means Macron's claim, while dramatic, requires context. France has not replaced the United States across the board, but it has replaced it comprehensively in the domain of battlefield targeting intelligence, satellite imagery, and the kind of technical data that fuels offensive and defensive operational planning. And the political implications of that shift are, in many ways, more important than the technical ones. Consider what Ukraine's situation looked like just 18 months ago. The country's military intelligence apparatus was so tightly woven with American systems that a single executive decision in Washington, a single phone call from the Oval Office, could effectively blind Ukrainian commanders. That is exactly what happened in March 2025. For hours and then days, Ukraine's ability to plan and execute operations was degraded. It was humiliating. It was dangerous. And it was a lesson that Ukraine and France clearly decided must never be repeated. What Macron has built is a strategic insurance policy, a guarantee that even if Washington's political winds shift, even if another White House confrontation strips Ukraine of American intelligence tomorrow, 2/3 of what Ukraine needs to fight will still be there, delivered from French military satellites orbiting 800 kilometers above the battlefield. As reported by Defense Matters, French intelligence officials have been explicit that the capabilities France provides are of technical origin, independent of American systems, drawing from France's own sovereign intelligence architecture. That word sovereign is not incidental. It is the entire point. France is not a relay station for American data. It is an independent intelligence power, and it is now acting like one. There is a geopolitical dimension to this shift that extends beyond the immediate conflict. As Business Insider reported in January, France's growing role is entirely consistent with Macron's broader strategic ambition, the push for European strategic autonomy. For years, European politicians talked about the need for Europe to reduce its dependence on American security guarantees. For years, those conversations produced reports and summits and declarations, but not much concrete action. Now, in the crucible of a real war, France is demonstrating what strategic autonomy actually looks like. It looks like satellite constellations. It looks like intelligence officers coordinating directly with Ukrainian military commanders. It looks like a French Navy helicopter descending onto a Russian oil tanker in the Mediterranean, while a British warship provides tracking support and a network of allied intelligence agencies watches the entire operation unfold in real time. This is Europe acting decisively, seriously, without waiting for Washington's permission. For Putin, this is a nightmare scenario, and not just in the obvious sense. The Kremlin has spent years trying to exploit divisions between European nations and between Europe and the United States. It has tried with some success to cultivate relationships with leaders willing to soften their positions, to buy time, to talk rather than act. Macron himself was once criticized for his phone diplomacy with Putin in the early months of the war. But that version of Macron is gone. The France that seized the Grinch, that built a satellite intelligence partnership with Ukraine, that openly declared itself the dominant provider of military intelligence to a country at war with Russia. This is a fundamentally different France, and Putin knows it. He knows that unlike Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron cannot be pressured through trade deals or NATO spending arguments. He knows that France's intelligence relationship with Ukraine is not a political bargaining chip. It is a sovereign military commitment embedded in hardware that orbits the Earth regardless of who holds office in Washington. He knows that the Shadow Fleet, which he spent $14 billion assembling, is now operating in a different world. A world where French naval commandos can board a sanctioned Russian oil tanker in international waters, where the captain gets arrested and taken to Marseille, where the ship sits under French Navy guard for nearly a month, and where the Kremlin cannot publicly complain without admitting the vessel was Russian all along. And he knows that what happened to the Grinch could happen to any of the hundreds of other Shadow Fleet ships currently at sea. The question is not whether the next seizure will happen. The question is when and how many will follow. That arithmetic matters. Even if the actual damage from any single seizure is limited, the economic and operational effect of sustained interdiction is not. Every ship that risks seizure represents a commercial counterparty that has to factor in the risk of losing its cargo, its vessel, and its operating license. Every insurer who has to consider underwriting a Shadow Fleet vessel now faces the reality that French, British, and American naval forces are actively hunting these ships. The financial ecosystem that makes the Shadow Fleet possible, the brokers, the shell companies, the flag registries, is under pressure it has never faced before. France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot summarized it precisely when he announced the Grinch's release after that multi-million euro fine. 3 weeks of costly immobilization on top of legal fees, penalties, and the detention of the captain. Circumventing European sanctions comes at a price, he said, not a devastating price for Russia's entire oil infrastructure, not yet, but a real price, and a price that is set to increase. What comes next is the critical question. Macron has already signaled his intention to push for legislative changes that would allow France to hold seized tankers for longer periods, a recognition that the current legal framework, while sufficient for operations like the Grinch seizure, has gaps that Russia has learned to exploit. As reported by The Insider, current French and international law limits how long a civilian vessel can be detained, even under sanctions, which is why the Grinch was ultimately released rather than confiscated. But that legal landscape is evolving. The only confirmed case in Europe of a Shadow Fleet tanker being fully confiscated occurred in Germany in January 2025. The vessel Eventin, towed away due to the environmental risk it posed. Even that case remains legally unresolved. The broader framework that would allow Europe to permanently seize and sell sanctioned Russian vessels does not yet exist. Macron intends to change that. And the remarkable part? France is just getting started. The Grinch has left French waters, fined, its captain arrested, its owners humiliated. But the next Shadow Fleet tanker is already at sea somewhere, and France is watching. If you want to stay ahead of these developments as they unfold, if you want analysis that goes beyond the headlines and gives you the real picture of what is happening in this conflict, then World Brief Daily is the channel for you. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to understand just how much has changed in the last few weeks. Because the balance of this war is shifting. France has made sure of that. And we will, of course, keep you updated every step of the way. Thanks for watching.